Thank you so much to the whole WGA team for inviting us here and throwing together this lovely event. I am thrilled to be on this panel or moderating this panel today. And thankfully, you have some of the smartest, best, and brightest on digital equity that are here to talk to you about that work. And I'm going to start on that point, digital. Because for those of you who are currently thinking, I don't work in tech, and so maybe this isn't the most relevant to me, pull onto your pants because we are going to explain all of that. It's also, early afternoon, so we'll keep everything lively. But before we jump into that point about why digital equity matters to the range of subject matter experts that are represented in this room, let me start with what that actually means. And broadly speaking, digital equity is everyone having access to an affordable and reliable high-speed internet connection and having the skills and the appropriate devices to use it in a meaningful way. That is the baseline definition, and I'm sure all of these people who are sitting on this panel will go, well, I would also add. So hopefully they will. But why it matters to you, from the national level and where I sit at Pew and from where we work with states, I think first and foremost, there are billions of dollars going out right now for broadband deployment all across the country. And what we know definitively from research is with the internet, it's not if you build it, they will come. Folks need to be able to afford it. They need to be able to understand how to use it because everything is in a digital first mindset now. So if someone doesn't have the right device, if they don't have the basic skills, they're going to need to rely on somebody else to do these things for them, whether that's accessing benefits, talking to a doctor, learning online. And Raphael actually said it on the last panel, which is everything is connected. Now, he's talking about it in the context of community and economic development, but I'm going to co-opt it because it's true here. And to put a finer point on it, there are 92% of jobs in the country right now that require some form of digital skills, but 1 in 3, let me repeat that, 1 in 3 workers lack basic digital skills for employment. So you all know the immense economic opportunities that we have ahead of us. That's why we're all here. And to put that back in context with individual workers, if you have someone who moves from having no skills to a job with at least 1 skill, you're looking at a 23% increase in their income. 3 or more, over 40%. That's significant. That also means revenue. So where we're at right now, we have states that are in the process of applying for funds from NTIA for the Digital Equity Act programs, as well as localities are preparing and tribal nations as well, and community organizations. Everyone is preparing for this money that's coming forward. And what's notable about this moment and also really relevant to folks here, and we'll talk about it in a minute, are the fact that for the first time, we have 56 plans for digital equity from all 50 states and 6 territories, laying out what the skills gaps are, what the connectivity gaps are, why don't people use the internet, and what do they want to be able to use it for. That reflects input from all different types of communities, industries, everyone from different walks of life. So what you'll hear from folks today is the importance of that data and more importantly, how y'all will be able to access it and ensure that everybody in the communities that you work with can benefit from the significant investment that's coming forward. So with that, Dr. Gant, I'm going to let you kick it off.
Great. Well, good afternoon. Am I on? All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to WGA for the invitation to be here today. My name is John Gant, and I serve as the Director of the Office of Minority Broadband Initiatives at NTIA. I'm also part of the senior executive team of the Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth, which administers the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or BEAD, and the Digital Equity Program as well. It's a real privilege to be here and to really have this opportunity to talk about digital equity because I've been doing a lot of work in this space for a long time. OMBI, I administered the Connecting Minorities Community Pilot Program. So we were appropriated through the in 2021 with roughly about $268 million to really look at models of how do we invest in communities around the United States where there's significant digital divide that are also anchored by a minority serving college or university, and to really look at that as an important model of how to try and bridge this the divides that we have. So we funded 93 different grants to 93 different universities, historically black colleges and universities, tribal colleges and universities, and minority serving institutions, including Hispanic serving institutions as well. And in here, we're really learning a lot about the particular challenges that it does take for communities to come together and bringing together multiple stakeholders all working in collaborative fashion, one, to improve access on these campuses, but also to serve the anchor community around there as well, too, where the digital divide is very significant. But the other thing, of course, as you all know, it's happening, and as Kathryn's mentioned, is that NTIA is administering other programs that are part of the Internet for All initiative. President Biden is really making an effort to make sure that everyone in the United States is connected. But this is a really difficult challenge to do. And so with the two programs, the BEAD and digital equity programs, right now they're very focused on the states developing their plans. The BEAD program is improving access. Digital equity is looking at all those other things about how do we make sure people have the right skills, equipment, opportunities from it to be able to help bridge this digital divide. So with the digital equity program, all states, as Kathryn said, have turned in their plans, and so there's a big march forward to develop the next set of plans of actually trying to implement solutions. So I appreciate it in our last session when Ann asked this question about the digital equity program, and I almost jumped up out of my seat and said, hey, we're going to answer that for you today as well. And so there's a lot that's really happening on the ground here today. We've got a number of folks that are here from NTIA that this morning we're at one of our grantees at Phoenix College, which is an amazing example of how you can see the community working with the community college to make sure not only does campus have access, but really deep inside of our neighborhoods that people have access to computers and so forth, implementing kind of very instrumental programs with digital navigators and things like that. But today we'll focus on the Digital Equity Act and the various programs and look at different approaches of how it can really improve economic outcomes throughout our economy in the United States. But thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Teri Mumm. I'm the Digital Access Program Manager for the Utah Broadband Center. We are located in the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity in the Grants and Incentives Department. I started digital inclusion work about 3 years ago. For the past 20 years, I've been doing collective impact, community-based project work, including funding federal programs in arts and health and human services and education. And in 2022, I became a digital inclusion fellow for Salt Lake City, and I haven't spent a day since not talking about digital equity. So I feel really fortunate to be coming up at a time when this work is taking off and when we can share 20 years worth of community building and relationship building to make this happen for our state. So I'm just here to try to figure it out and listen and answer any questions you may have.
Well, I could just say ditto, I suppose, since I have a very similar role to Teri's. My name is Erin Lorandos, and I am the Digital Equity Program Manager with the Arizona Commerce Authority. So the ACA is the administering entity here in Arizona for both the BEAD and the digital equity funding. And, our jobs are very much similar and aligned in that we're wrapping up the planning piece and moving into that capacity building piece. And, I gotta take take my opportunity in the sun before somebody co-ops the 6th C here in Arizona is connectivity. It is not chips. Okay. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But no, honestly, you know, this work is so important, and it is so exciting to be a part of it at this pivotal moment when there is, you know, generational investment in this work that many of us have been doing for a very long time. So getting that nationwide attention on these issues that we've seen in our communities is very important. And you know, to echo again what Teri said, we're just along for the ride and figuring it out as we go along. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Davida Delmar. I am a citizen of the Navajo Nation, and I just so happen to be based here in Phoenix. But I actually work for two national organizations, the first being AMERIND Critical Infrastructure, which is an insurance company founded on insurance, but we do many other things, including critical infrastructure deployment and adoption, which is where I'm based, and that's my department. We're based in Santa Ana Pueblo, and we are owned by tribes, and we exclusively only serve tribes too. We've partnered with the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, so 90% of my job is to work at NDIA and to work on the tribal initiatives and indigenous initiatives at NDIA, including translating a lot of this digital equity and inclusion work and defining it within our indigenous communities. So I'm really proud of the work we've done. I've only been in the space for 2 years. Prior to that, I worked with tribal nations and leaders and within the college going atmosphere within the American Indian College Fund. So my passion is working with tribes and working with organizations that you know, propel and amplify thriving communities within Native nations. And so the reason why digital equity is such a pivotal, you know, aspect right now is because of the funding that's coming down, but also defining digital equity and inclusion within tribal communities. And of course, that's different for every tribe, whether that be my, you know, nation of Navajo or up in Alaska, which is very different, and as opposed to other communities such as Hoopa Valley Tribe, Gila River even. So hopefully I can bring those perspectives to this panel and talk more about the perspectives of partnering with those nations, as well as, you know, seeing what digital equity has done in those communities to create thriving communities. So thank you.
Right. Thank you, all of you. We'll start with where I kicked it off, which is why should folks in this room and elsewhere, people who don't think about digital equity on an everyday, probably every hour basis, like Teri and Erin alluded to, folks who don't necessarily see that overlap or relevance at this point, why should they care about the Digital Equity Act programs? And what should they know? Dr. Gant, I'm going to punt it to you first for that one.
So it's such an important question. And in full disclosure, I appreciate the panelists saying they've been thinking a lot about it. And it's something that consumed with, and actually I've been thinking about it for my entire career as well. So I care greatly about the understanding what digital equity is and why it's important to us. If you think about it, if you look at our lives today, that every aspect of our life is touched by some kind of, you know, the computer, the internet, and that sort of thing. But what really matters is, does that allow everybody to really have opportunity for economic growth, social development, everything human development, everything that a person wants to be able to do. And so I've actually founded the Center for Digital Inclusion when I was a professor at the University of Illinois to really begin to look at this question in earnest, both by deploying the network and then thinking about how we're using all these different applications and thinking about how do we do it in a way that really makes it different in a person's life. So I look at this from my perspective always comes from my own personal experience, where I grew up with my dad who had multiple sclerosis. And as you know, it's a degenerative condition that as time you lose control of your hands and speech and walking and mobility and things like that. But that computer really made the difference in his life. So, and I grew up where I could see we got a he got a Macintosh computer from as a, through work in the mid 80s. And that all of a sudden became the extension of everything that he was able to do in great ways. And ever since then, I've been very inspired to figure out how do we make sure that when we're developing our computers, we're thinking about deployment of networks, that people can actually be able to use it in their everyday life to really make a true difference in their life and then make a difference in the lives of others. And so that's how I look at it. I'm, at the Department of Commerce, we take this very, very seriously with the large amount of funding in our programs. You're looking at roughly, $64 billion worth of funding when you add up all the dollars together. But what really matters is how do we deploy this in a way that are reaching those areas that have been unserved and underserved, and also give opportunity for everyone to be able to engage, but in a way, not so much that we are pushing down here's using computer, but instead, how do we uplift our communities? How do we uplift everyone there that are part of it? How do we give everybody a voice and a say and be able to do that and really design it so that it can really make a difference? And then, you see great advancements when we think about healthcare. Right now, if you go to the doctor, everything you do is digital. When it comes, the cliche about finding a job, but the truth is that not only finding the job, you've got to fill out the application online, but all the training and so forth, the onboarding, everything is all digital as well too. So it's a very important part of our lives, but yet there's still very large segments of our population that are left behind. There's access is one issue, but they're really deep, meaningful use. It really remains a very important challenge. And then lastly, how do you give everybody a voice in doing this? This morning, we're at Phoenix College, and they have a vision board in this. So our grant is funded about $4.2 million at Phoenix College. And the students have this really great computer lab with makerspace and making all those kind of technologies open to everyone. But then they had the vision board with the students' voice about how they want to see computers being used, not only on campus, but also within their communities to help their families and others to really have that voice and to do it in a culturally relevant way and doing it in a meaningful way. And I think that's a big part of what digital equity is all about.
I want to talk a little bit, and Davida, I think maybe we'll start with you about the plans. And as folks are trying to kind of apply these concepts locally or to the populations they serve, what should they be looking for in the digital equity plans that states and territories and other partners have put out?
So the states were required to partner with tribes. And so that's what I've been looking for within the state's plans to ensure that tribes are being included in this conversation, that meaningful engagement is part of their process and planning process to when developing these plans. And now as we look towards the capacity and implementation is the same thing of like ensuring that they're included in the conversation and that they're looking at it at a holistic approach too. So not only those that live on tribal lands, but also those who live in our urban areas and different populations that are integrated into our everyday lives. So for me, meaningful engagement means catered solutions to covered populations. And even though tribes aren't technically a covered population in that aspect, just the fact that they are required to, partner with tribes implies that, they should be included in that meaningful engagement. But I also feel that that tribes should also develop their own digital equity plans. And this might be going a little ahead of our conversation here, but tribes weren't given, digital equity funds or digital equity planning funds at the same time as states. Actually, that's going to be forthcoming. So they're a bit behind the game in terms of getting the funding in terms of, developing what it means, like the current state of digital equity in their communities, as well as making, strategic planning forwards for digital equity plans. So I'm hopeful that, states have a clear understanding what tribes want and that tribes will eventually catch up and, have that opportunity to voice their concerns and get funding for the gaps and opportunities that they see in their communities.
I
feel like there's just this pause in between each comment because of the mic, so I apologize for that. But to piggyback off of what Davida just shared, one of the things that is in our plan here in Arizona is a designation we're calling a digital equity specialist. And really, that's just a fancy way of saying that we're hoping to create points of contact in every county and hopefully eventually every tribe, where we can ensure that feedback loop is happening and in a meaningful way. So we don't want to do anything at the state level that comes down to any community and tells them what to do. We want to ensure that what is happening at the state level is in alignment with what's happening at the local level, and what's happening at the local level feeds into what we're doing. We're all trying to get to the same end goal, so why would we not go there together, right? Along with that, those people in every community will be given the opportunity to participate in some formal and informal cohort educational opportunities, so that in case they haven't had the opportunity to be in the space before, they'll be coming to these conversations on an equal playing field, everyone speaking the same language, so to speak. We're also hoping to get ahead of some of that disparity in the timelines with the funding, that these folks that are designated in their communities will help guide the local planning efforts. So just one example of how a state might be able to fulfill the aspiration that Davida has placed.
The very high expectation. I will say that we are one state that did do planning sub-grants, and we did have 2 of our 8 tribal groups submit and create plans. There's been challenges, but I think what we hope to accomplish by doing that was to further develop relationships and continue the conversation. So we do have those 2 plans up on our website, connectingutah.com. One is a very preliminary plan from the Navajo Nation, and one is the Shibwits Band of Paiutes. So it is a little tricky with either BEAD or digital equity, and which funds and what funds tribal organizations are getting, and how they're using their collective funds right now. So we're in this really big conversation about just trying to map what's out there and what's already happening, so that we don't duplicate projects or efforts. From the digital equity side, we're trying to create resources and do the training in the cohort. We have a few very talented, disparate digital equity practitioners in the state, but we really need to build an ecosystem and provide training and resources for those programs, so that when our grant funds are available, we have some programs that are ready to go with folks who can manage them. So I don't want to be negative, but just, we have really worked hard to build those relationships, and, we're going to have to just continue to be present through this next phase to make sure that we can all kind of figure out where we need to go.
I think the resourcing point is one that you will hear often from us, and really anybody that you talk to that operates in this space right now. Just the lack of funding that is available, although this amount that is coming out now is enormous. But the states right now, what Teri just said, the word ecosystem, and I want to draw attention back to that. They're making the initial investment in this ecosystem that we need for the long term. Just to clarify, we at Pew did an initial review of the 50 state plans. Almost every state will focus on affordability, skilling, training, and devices. Where you start to see some differentiation is in some of the strategies that Erin and Teri just lined up. So are they investing in building that that ecosystem of digital equity specialists and trainers that they're going to deploy into communities? Are they focusing on things like telehealth to resolve what is a significant gap in the behavioral health space? So we see this significant alignment and need that is shared across states, but kind of once you start digging into it, at deeper levels, you'll see more specialization. And so, Dr. Gant, I'm curious, 2.75 billion for Digital Equity Act programs.
Yeah.
But we know there are other needs that are complementary to other existing federal programs. So could you speak a little bit about how you might like to see partners working together to use federal funds?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So when you look at the model here, so it's $2.75 billion. And when you look at this model and approach for doing this, it's one where this takes, as I say, an all nation, all community, all of us working together kind of process to really come up with tailored solutions that really meet the needs within each state and then within various communities within those states. The primary goal is to reach these, unserved and covered populations, and as well as the BEAD is connecting unserved and underserved areas. And it takes a lot of work to try and figure out these solutions to be able to do this. What we're finding is that there is a relationship between the BEAD and digital equity program, because for states, as they work out their BEAD program and they realize we can reach all of our connectivity goals, if they have money left over in there, that can also be pivot and use that money for digital equity programs and use that on top of what they're doing in terms of implementing this next phase around digital equity. There's also opportunity to seek other types of funding from other places to try and solve the problems too. So there is opportunity for the states and their partners to all work together to work and pursue funding from other resources. We're seeing that even within our CMC pilot program, where some of our awardees have our award, but they're also reaching out, getting great results from their work. And that is actually allowing them to then scaffold and go seek other additional funding that's available as well too. One reason why we are traveling the country and visiting states and so forth is to listen and hear what other ideas that are out there as well. And we've been doing a lot of work on the ground with different agencies to try and say, hey, here's some other things that we're hearing that's coming up that also needs to be addressed. So, for example, with once you build and you start to address these issues, there's a lot of opportunities like in health, for example, and areas around telehealth and so forth. So we're reaching out to other federal agencies to try and see, can we partner up and develop other types of programs and so forth. There's a number of different so with my work, working with colleges and universities, we're working also with various White House initiatives that serve the different communities of colleges and universities to say, what else can we scaffold on top of this? So we're working like with the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health. We got libraries, right? So part of my background is also working with libraries. So working with Institute Museum and Library Services to be able to scaffold on other types of funding to help complement this as well too. And we're reaching out to other foundation communities and others to try and say, what else can you do to help provide this? But it takes all of us working together. It's very much a coalition approach. And if Angie Bennett were here, the director of the Digital Equity Program, one thing that she would say is that this has also been an approach that's been the largest participatory approach in the United States to really have a voice in designing what this program looks like, and also having a voice in the implementation of all these different programs as well too. And then lastly, the competitive program will open after this round of money is released. And that competitive program also will be a great place if you have community organizations and others that are working together to apply. And those applications will be done outside of the state process as well too. So there's still even more rounds of additional funding that will come out after this phase as well too.
Could I add one thing to that?
Of course.
One thing that you mentioned kind of jogged something in my mind as well. At least here in Arizona, we're getting a lot of money for digital equity, don't get me wrong, but it's not going to completely bridge the digital divide, right, as we're all well aware. So I think that it's important to look at programs that are happening during this capacity period as as pilots or testing grounds for those additional funding opportunities. You can take a project that might be funded through capacity and then take that to that next that next foundation or that next corporation and say, look what I did with this amount of money. Look, what do you think I could do with more? Kind of speaking to, the comments that the folks from Local First made as well, and kind of, using those community resources as well. I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Yeah, go, Teri.
Oh, here we go. I just wanted to build on that too, because that is the current message that goes out, but Utah happens to be what we call a shortfall state. And because of the algorithms and the unique way that our population is centered around our urban core and our long, our rural areas are very high cost. And so we don't think that we're going to see any additional funds. And our allocation for DEA is less than 1% of the total awards. So we're in the other boat where we're trying to figure out how to even get there with the extensive outreach that we have done and not disappoint our communities. We know this is a entry-level thing, but the more we go out and tell people we're going to connect everyone, the more expectation falls on our office. And we're just trying to figure out. We had 60 days from the time the NOFO comes out to come up with the first plan. So do reach out if you have solutions and you have something to contribute. We're just going back around. We did form the Utah Digital Opportunity Network in order to have, practitioners and folks from across the state willing to kind of collaborate with us on these applications. So I think it looks different in every state, and we have to kind of be careful how we move forward.
And then just to add one very important point to this is that when you look at these programs and you look at the implementation of them, there's also a component we acknowledge the fact that this is a great learning opportunity about how to do things. This is the first time we're doing this at this kind of scale. So there are components that are built into these programs for evaluation and assessment so that we can learn about this process, use that information, and then scale to the next idea and so forth. And I think that's a very important part of this. And it's the first time that we've had such widespread mechanisms to really truly learn about these, what we're learning from these, and be able to use that information. Because when you go seek additional funding, you always need to be able to show kind of proof of concept. Hey, in our state, we did digital navigator programs that focused on seniors. We learned all these different things. And yes, we've got some good data to help show what the impact is and a lot of lessons learned. And that really helps to solidify that you're building capacity within your state as well, too.
Okay, I'm basically consolidating about 4 questions into one here, so I apologize in advance. A couple of things. First, on this question of measurement, but also going back to some of the strategies each of you have discussed earlier. One, I'm curious about what you're envisioning at this point, or Davida, in your case, maybe where you've consulted with folks to help them scope solutions that meet local need. So if y'all could provide some examples of, again, what you're mapping out, and these are proposals, they're not funded yet. So that's on NTIA, which we'll come back to. So one is, what did you learn through the planning process? What are some strategies that you've designed to respond to those needs of covered populations, of which I'll just note, Arizona, just shy of 80% of the state's population falls in that covered category. For Utah, it's 61. It's not small. So what strategies are you designing? The counterpoint to that is, or second question is building on Dr. Gant's last point around measurement. So how at this point are y'all thinking about that question of measurement and measuring it in a meaningful way so you can point to examples of success, so you can talk about investable future strategies? Teri.
Yeah, so I come from the collective impact world, and so I'm used to having a standard measurement across the board. So we don't have that with this program because it's new and everybody's building. And we haven't been giving any kind of set expectations so far about what kinds of things we'll have to measure in the future. So we've just decided in order to really do true capacity building around digital equity that we need to create that data for our state. So we put it as an objective in our plan, and we are creating the Utah Digital Opportunity Index, which will measure across all of the domains that are required for the grant. So economic opportunity, access to healthcare, civic duty, and then also the programs themselves. So we're trying to create more of a hub and spoke model so we can provide the resources for any community to pick up and deliver within their own community. We have so much need around, digital equity infrastructure that we want to make those resources readily available for any group that wants to use them, and then continue to community build around that. So by providing the data that they can use to report and compare on their programs from year to year will help us do that.
So one thing that I'd like to highlight in answering this is we're really aiming to build on what's already happening. We heard a little bit about those asset inventories in the previous panel, and here in Arizona, we have a lot of organizations who are already working on these pieces. And it seems silly from a state perspective in a short amount of time to try to recreate something that's already happening. So one of our strategies is really to just increase that capacity for those organizations that are already doing the work. And again, hopefully using that to springboard into further funding opportunities. I'm really excited whenever I hear Teri talk about these shared measurement pieces because, there's one of us in every state. Yeah, right? Yeah, all of us are. There's one of us in every state, and we're all coming together and having these moments where we're like, okay, but we haven't done this before, right? So leaning on each other's experience, having built some of those measurements and creating those standards, I think is really exciting for those of us who are in states that maybe haven't gotten that far down the path, And so being able to share those resources is really exciting to us.
I think one thing I left out too was to be able to provide that data to either individual counties. In our state plan, it's the Area Association of Governments, so that they have an extra data set and tool that's specific to their communities too. So most of our plan is focused in Utah, but we do hope to partner with our national friends.
Well, and just to further that point a little bit, prime example is the Navajo Nation. I mean, we share that joy of serving that community. Mm-hmm. And so it would be really silly to stop something at the border of a state mm-hmm. when a nation spreads across that border, in multiple states in that case.
So for tribes, we don't have the benefit of this. I think NDIA is trying to create that space for tribes because in terms of funding work with the digital navigator space, seeing how that works within tribal communities, also putting in efforts, because this is an upcoming resource that we're going to publish later this year is an Indigenous Digital Equity Planning Guide for tribes to kind of help define what digital equity means in their tribe and their community and the space that they're doing. And sometimes can be, sort of a trying to get tribes on board in terms of investment and funding in this. So we have a lot of champions out there within our tribal communities working on this, and maybe it's just a one-person show, and we try to outreach to those folks and invite them to the table. As states are saying that, they're talking to each other and sharing resources, we're trying to create that ourselves. And it's not something that someone told us to do or is creating a space for us. At NDA, we've started the Indigenous Digital Inclusion Working Group to find practitioners in the field doing this work and asking them, why is it important for a tribe to start their own digital equity plan? Why is it important for us to define, what digital equity is for tribes specific to the tribe, not in general? not a pan-Indian tribe, kind of thing. So I think for us, communication with states, both and regional and federal, is definitely essential, because in terms of where they get their data is going to define a lot of where the funding is going. The problem with data, though, is that, data on tribes can be, outdated or not truthful to what is actually happening in our communities. So this aspect of asset mapping and within digital equity planning could have informed a lot of what, tribes are actually up against in terms of the digital divide, but that funding is not going to come until later. But also on the fact of data is that tribes should have control over the data of how they talk to their community, conducting community surveys, because a lot of what we're doing is in the context of a lot of history, policy and political entanglements, social context, cultural context, even, and a lot of that sort of context can inform the scope of the work that the tribe is doing to amplify or prioritize digital equity initiatives. So I'll just say that it's still coming to tribes. States do have an advantage here because they're able to have plans ready at this point. But I think it's still coming for tribes, and not that they can't do it already, because we've seen that in play. We've seen tribes develop a broadband plan, years before we saw, and to develop, broadband deployment and build their own infrastructure, including fiber, 20 years ago. So it's not like they're behind. It's just that, the federal funding and support for tribes is now becoming official, within this year. I think the communication at the federal level too needs to be a little bit more clear. I think it was clear with the tribal broadband connectivity program, but with the digital equity funding, I think we need more, staff who are from Native communities who can understand digital equity initiatives a little bit more, and really talk to tribes about what initiatives they need to do to, get this funding to kind of be more competitive in this space too.
Dr. Gant, could you shed a little bit of light on where we are in the Digital Equity Capacity Grant process for the states, and whether or not you have any recommendations on how states and other partners in this room can prepare so that way those applications get funded quickly and efficiently. And Davida, I want to come back to the point you just made, but in a minute.
Yeah, great question. So we're in capacity season, as many of you may know. And so each state has submitted their capacity plan. And so there's a window now where each state now has to operationalize and submit a final plan for that. And it's a pretty short, it's a 60-day window with that. So I know that each state is working on it and to try and, get their plans put together. There is a great deal of technical assistance that the federal program officers do provide to help the states work through the plans. But it's also a time where I think there's a lot of excitement about the opportunity that's here. In this process, I think it's been very important not only that there's a lot of involvement from local stakeholders and engagement and so forth, but there's also a lot of work going on to really make sure that these plans can get over that finish line, on time as well. So right now, my colleagues will tell you that they're very busy. If I could kind of put words in their mouth, and it's actually, great that they're here today to help. And you all know, as you're looking at the various state, your states as well too. So I'm actually from North Carolina, and I shout out to fellow North Carolinian, and I was actually pretty heavily involved before joining NTIA with the state of North Carolina to try and help them, develop their asset mapping plans and things like that. And I know there's a lot of work that's there because we're trying to do so much to try and meet the needs across all these different communities as well. But very optimistic that the states will get things done in time. I think the timing of it is such that they're focusing right now on the states, and then we move towards the tribal part of the program. And I think it was done intentionally to do it that way, so that it would be sort of the full agency's resources would be available to help move those plans forward as well. So, I think that's a big part of how we're trying to move forward. But I don't know if there's more about that question you want me to answer.
No, I think you
Yeah.
covered it. I'm curious whether we're talking about tribal communities, whether we're talking about folks who are considered in the covered population category, such as folks with disabilities or language barriers, veterans, those who live in rural areas. I'm curious how y'all would like to see sort of these disparate groups come together to think about programmatic implementation. What would you like to see? What would you like to see happening over the next year, 2 years, beyond?
So for the next couple of years, I think it's already happening. I'll just say that there's a lot of engagement within tribes that are happening. I do acknowledge the state's work in that space where they're making a concerted effort to meet these requirements, but also the fact that we shouldn't do it because it's required. We should do it because these are our neighbors and these are sovereign nations that we're working with as well. So acknowledging sovereign status of the tribes and doing research and demographic, research, just do your homework when working with tribes too, which is kind of funny that we have to say this in a lot of spaces, is to do this type of work. And so the other thing is to also acknowledge the fact that as sovereign nations, tribes have, current plans and strategic plans in place. And so understanding the long-term vision for connectivity for the tribe is probably already existing. So I think asking tribes for this is definitely important. And of course, for tribes to do that themselves. And in terms of, launching these programs and implementation is, have an understanding of and disclose information about data collection practices and how the information is going to be used for research and gain knowledge to be more transparent about how we discuss ownership and protection of data within their tribal communities. And then also, of course, sharing the findings and acknowledging the work that the tribe and the communities that have done and have been doing, I guess I could say, and also understanding the capacity of the tribe too, because we've encountered tribes, one being up in Idaho, she's a one-man show. She's working on broadband deployment and digital equity efforts all at once. And so, acknowledging that space of that maybe there is funding in terms of, staffing, or that more partnership is needed in terms of creating a digital equity ecosystem that is supportive of tribes and does meaningful partnership in that space, acknowledging the fact that there's capacity issues. And of course, finally, just a reflection of like how we're doing the work and improving on it for future work too. So I think what I've heard in the space is that, some people have said this is the first time we've worked with tribes, and it's like, okay, so there's many other issues that we've worked with beyond connectivity that tribes are connected to. So I think transferring this work to other work we're doing in terms of resource development, economic opportunity, various other partnership and leadership engagement that can transfer to other projects we're doing and amplify, a more meaningful engagement with tribes overall.
I think if there's one word to sum it up, Davida said it, it's partnerships, right? We already heard that here in Arizona, nearly 80% of our neighbors fall into one or more of those covered populations. And there are already scads of organizations who are trying to serve those populations. And so getting those folks together in a room, building those coalitions, building those partnerships, and hopefully allowing those dollars to spread further because of those partnerships, I think is key.
Same. Yeah, continuing to build. And I think one of the concerns or questions that we have right now about working and measuring our covered populations is exactly how we're going to do that. I'm not in the I don't want to tell anybody or list anybody in a category that they didn't self-describe, and they're not standard across, the populations we're measuring. And so, it's we're trying to figure it out, but we have built the relationships, the programs are there. It's just kind of trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together.
Sorry, can you say a little bit more about the measurement piece and data collection? And, I hear you on the categorization point but from a measurement question, what else are you worried about? Is there anything else that you're worried about in terms of data collection for these programs?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're just getting into all the different, requirements and the things, the goals and the things we want to measure, the alignment across, NTIA's goals. It would be really nice to know what you guys are going to measure. I'm serious. I'm not kidding. Like, to have a clear set of measurements. What are we going to look at in a year? What's NTIA going to look at in a year to decide that we're on track or not? Those are the kinds of things that we're aligning across agencies, we're aligning across communities, so anything that people are looking at would be helpful to know in advance.
So Erin, I'll pass you the mic in a second. I am curious, is that an opportunity for folks who work in economic development or workforce development or housing to raise their hand and say, hey, here's how we look at these questions and how we measure change over time? Okay, we see nodding up here, so thank you. Yes.
She's the question.
Yeah.
One of the safe areas may be looking at the school districts within your community. If they're Title I school districts, chances are the needs exist. And so you can work with that as a basis and work directly with those school districts because they're suffering those same issues. Particularly, they've experienced it through the pandemic and they're already, struggling with it. So that would be a suggestion. Start.
Yeah, we work really closely with our State Board of Ed. We have some issues around what we can actually access. But yeah, we're going cross-sector to try to gather as much as we can.
Erin?
Just to piggyback on that, I would just like to take the opportunity to say, well, I'm getting to that. Don't worry, Teri, I will get to libraries. But kiddos in K-12 or K-20 even as a concept is not one of the covered populations that we were asked to identify barriers for. And I think that was, sorry, I'm going to get in trouble, but I think that was a bit of a misstep when creating this program, because that's what gets rid of the generational systemic, it's going to happen again, it's going to happen again. If we can do things for kiddos before they become adults that fall into the covered populations, that's how we fix this, right? So yes, and I wish we could do even more of that. I didn't say that. Right. So and one of the things that we did in our plan is here in Arizona, there are a couple of instances of state seals of blank, okay, that kiddos can go through a prescribed curriculum for, prove that they have skills in, and then they get a seal on their diploma, and they're able to lean into that when they're going into higher ed or into the workforce, etc. And one of the examples of that is financial literacy, for example. So one of the things that we're hoping to do, and I did sneak it into our plan because I leaned into the fact that these kids are in families that fall into the covered populations, right, is we hope to establish a state seal of digital literacy. So kids coming up through the K-12 and going into workforce or going into higher ed can get that education check those boxes, and we have great partners in the state that have already created curriculum. I'm looking at you, Elena, that does this, right? So it's just getting our schools to have the capacity to adopt that curriculum and getting that digital literacy seal added as something that they can do, and that can help break down those barriers as these people move into the next planes of life.
Yeah, so I think one of the greatest challenge for launching this type of program is exactly what you're breaking up. When we look across community, we see how diverse the needs are, and there becomes this real tough trade-off as what is the top priority. And I think, as you can tell in the program, when you look at covered populations and you look at the statistics, those are the folks that are the least connected, the least engaged, the least ready for moving forward. But one of the things I think is helpful is the fact there's a notion of intersectionality. Because when you look at those 9 covered populations, there's also a lot of intersections between them. And I think Erin's really bringing up a really nice strategy of saying, well, it doesn't explicitly say, people that are K-20 or K-12, but if we look at their families and we know this, the children are, the students are often the information intermediary for the family. Now all of a sudden you've got some intersection there that does fit in with those priorities, and those kind of plans make a lot of good sense for your, for you to include as well. But that's the toughest thing, is that we couldn't solve this problem. We had to go for the most difficult part of this. Was really the priority, but that intersectionality helps to really be creative in how we can reach those folks as well too.
I want to leave a few minutes for questions from the audience, but any closing remarks before we open it up?
I'll tee it up on the question about libraries. So as the dean of North Carolina Central at the School of Library and Information Science, I've always been a professor in an information school with library science programs as well too. And when we think about our anchor institutions, we think about our schools, our libraries, health, and so forth as well. And we do have some expertise in there. So as you all are working, it's also very important, even with our CMC program, I would say probably about 30 to 40% of those do involve the libraries being an important stakeholder and community anchor institution to help serve these needs. And they're great flexible spaces for doing all this kind of training and so forth. But I know, Erin, you've got a lot of experience with libraries too, as a librarian yourself.
Yes, I am a librarian. I have the tattoo to prove it. So just to follow up on that, I think, that is not only are they listed as community anchor institutions, but they are those flexible spaces where community members already go to get information and get educational opportunities. And, sometimes it's just get a break and send the kids to story time, and that's fine too. But those spaces are places that many of our vulnerable members of our community are already coming. So leveraging those within our communities as places for digital literacy, upskilling opportunities, workforce development opportunities, hosting resume review clinics, having your Arizona at Works and your one-stops coming in and doing educational opportunities for the whole community, and also making sure that the families who are coming to those have something for their kids to do while they're in that space is a really easy way. And I know one of the questions that we had talked about before coming together today was the concept of digital navigators. And library staff were digital navigators before NDIA told us that we were digital navigators. And so, which I say that with love, I really do, because, libraries have been that place where people go to get their tax forms, to get that education, to get whatever it is that they're maybe uncomfortable asking anyone else for. Maybe they don't have someone in their family that can be that intermediary. And so a lot of times it's that frontline staff person at the library who gets that question. And so making sure that our community anchor institution employees have, that basic digital literacy framework so that they can pass it on to their community members when they ask is key. And one of the first jobs I had in the Valley when I moved here was we were on the tech team. They didn't call us digital navigators, but we hosted one-on-one tech classes for our community. You know, Tuesdays and Thursdays from 12 till 2 or whatever it is, you could walk up and you could ask any question. And I got everything from, hey, how do I download this audiobook, to, I kid you not, this gentleman came in with a computer in a box. He had just been over to Best Buy and his next stop was the library. And he said, help me figure this thing out. And so guess what I did for the next few hours? I sat there and I plugged in his desktop computer, which we had to then put it back in the box and send it home with him. And, you know, fingers crossed he could do it himself, right? But we were there as that resource. And that's something that folks who maybe haven't had that opportunity to go into the library for that type of question don't realize that that is a huge part of a library staff person's role. And that's anybody from, you know, the teenager working, you know, shelving books to the degreed librarian. So having that baseline skill set is so important. And I promise I will relinquish the floor about libraries now.
Don't worry, Erin, it's not just librarians. We hear this a lot from folks who work in housing too, and just the wraparound services, but also the resources that are required to provide that support in those organizations that are already doing service delivery. So librarians are they're loyal advocates, and they need more support to do this work. Davida?
Oh, just that digital navigators are awesome. That's what my work is at NDIA, is the National Digital Navigator Corps. We have 18 sites, 7 so a mix of rural and tribal. So if you want to learn more, we're going to do a publication later this year to talk more about our work. We have a lot of our, people are saying, like, pilot program. We're testing out different things in digital equity as digital navigators, and hopefully can share more work about that, but I can share more later. But yeah, just the same as Erin, that was a great example of digital navigator work. Thanks.
I lied. I have one more thing. So for folks who are based in Arizona, if you are unaware, every single person in the state has access to a digital navigator through our state library system. We have a team of digital navigators that work remotely. And then we also have community-based in-person digital navigators through the Digital Equity Institute that are there to help. So these people are in our communities already, and they're a fantastic resource.
Well, we're on digital navigators. I think the current time, there's never been a bigger need for digital navigation as folks are coming off of ACP. So if you have those roles, or please just realize people are going to need a lot of support in that area. That's it. I would just say, you know, as states, we're partners. We're partners with the federal level, and we're partners with everyone below, and I know it's not a hierarchy, but, you know, with our community folks. And, you know, we try to look at everybody as a potential partner and definitely see everyone as stakeholders. And we ask the same, that you guys come to us and consider us a partner and a stakeholder, not just a vehicle for which the federal funds come down through to your communities. So we really want to see this be successful. So please come to us anytime.
All right, we are going to open it up for questions, but I think we're going to do a little switcheroo on you first. Dr. Gant?
So real quick, we actually have one of our CMC grantees partners here with us, Dr. Brian Carter from University of Arizona. It's got a really innovative model of incorporating the community as part of their CMC grant with the Delmar Pavilion. So it was a little mix up, but I think you all benefit greatly from hearing more, just a snippet of their approach. So, Dr. Carter.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what we're doing at the University of Arizona with our community partners and the grant that we received. So thank you very much for the funding. I will be brief. We have a 3-part initiative that's going on with this grant. The first part is to provide computing kits for students of various economic demographic levels, or lower economic demographic levels, so that they can keep those computing kits their entire college career. That includes include laptops, routers, headsets, webcams, all those kinds of things, so that they can access the content that's being delivered online. The second initiative was to shore up the digital classrooms that we have at our partner sites located in Yuma, Douglas, Passamaquoddy, Thatcher, and at one of our community anchors, the Dunbar Pavilion in Tucson, which is a formerly segregated school. And the third initiative, which is the one that I get most excited about, is the level of programming that we're developing for Dunbar and with Dunbar based on their community needs assessment. So we're working with the community to develop programming on workforce development, financial literacy, healthcare, productivity development, and creative development that will then empower that community to be competitive in a very competitive workforce. Doing all of that in a brand new computer space that has been developed for Dunbar, and we're even doing something that's going to leapfrog that community into the 22nd century by creating opportunities for them to create community narratives using holograms. So you can imagine that, you know, these ethnographic narratives and these community histories being available for the next generation to see their relatives and their community histories in 3D. So it's so exciting. So thank you very much for that opportunity.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Carter. Yeah.
Use it, thank you. Which is the $1.25 billion part of the DEA. So specifically, NTIA can use these funds to provide grants directly to community anchor institutions, nonprofits, higher ed institutions. And the objective statutorily is to increase broadband access and adoption and ensure geographic coverage, right? But we've heard over and over again today about how there's challenges with capacity. So there is a world in which you sort of have these nonprofit CAIs falling into two broad categories. Category one is organizations that are well practiced at securing federal grants, deploying those grants, reporting on them over the period of 5 years, right? And then you have a second category potentially with local community organizations that are doing the work of providing digital navigator programs, doing cybersecurity training, doing device loan programs that have never in their lives secured federal grants.
Right.
And so would love to hear about how NTIA is thinking of this in the process of drafting the DE competitive NOFO, so that all the objectives of IJA can be brought to life with the DE competitive funds.
Right. So I'll answer the question, but I'll also make a caveat that my comments are not informed by any drafting of that competitive NOFO. And so just in full disclosure, but our friend from the EDA actually hit on part one of this question. I loved her response when she said, hey, look, when we do these programs, you usually get the same group of folks who are coming. And to your point, and you look at the objectives of IJA and the Digital Equity Act, it's to try and expand that group of folks to do that. So we're very intentional in the way that when you look at both the planning and the capacity, there's a lot of language in there to help support that. There's a review process where there's mandates, then we're actually checking and reviewing that to make sure you've done your homework, you've really talked with these folks. We're talking with them too, so we know who's also out there. And while everybody's plan has been approved, there was a process to make sure that happens. And I can only imagine that with the competitive, there'll be a similar type of process to make sure that we're doing that. We're learning a lot of lessons actually from the CMC program because we faced the same challenge. So we really worked hard to really go across the states and reach every corner to let folks know about this program. We provided a lot of indirect technical assistance to be able to do that. We had a lot of webinars. In fact, today, one of the vice chancellors for sponsored research for another university said he really liked our process because of all the webinars. We had 8 webinars, to really help the public know, because we knew there were a large number of people who were applying who never applied for this type of work before as well too. Secondly, for those folks that, when they receive the grant, there will also be a lot of technical assistance to help you with that as well too. And that's a big part of what we're doing now. And that really is making a difference because we understand that's an important capacity building component as well too. And so I can, while the drafting of the competitive NOFO is underway, I know one of the core values is to really make sure that there's very intentional activities by us and also by the awardees that we try and achieve those goals as well, because otherwise you have a real mismatch in the programs. So we're really working very hard, and there's a lot. In fact, it's probably the highest level of indirect and direct technical assistance you've ever seen for any grant. And our CMC program has been a model for that to help inform how they're doing it. On the tribal program is also another good model of how that's happening as well too. And it is very extraordinary because our team members really care that we get it right.
Thank you. Well, please join me in thanking panelists, and if folks will be around for the happy hour, raise your hand so they can come find you. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.